Shadows. There are several different shadows and ways that shadows can be done. What we're going to focus on tonight is actually under the render tab and this shadows tool at the end here. We need something to cast shadows to and from and so on and so forth. I'm going to just draw a little outhouse building in the name of doing it from scratch. Let's see, what are we going to do? We're going to go brick veneer wall with a render finish. We're going to do a little building about that sort of size. Wall offset, let's make it a set size. In there, we're going to make him 8 meter long building by 6 meters wide. Really exciting building. We're going to stick a roof on him. So I'm just going to track the walls. Just make sure which roof I've got. Yep, one with eaves. There we go. Let's whack a door into the front of him. So I use external, nice big fancy 1 meter door. Let's go by center and inside flush will do. Whack that in the middle. And let's put let's put a window on the side. Something like that. And of course, putting windows and doors in really isn't necessary, but we're doing it for the sake of it. Okay, there's our little building. If we go to ISO, it sits there looking pretty like so. Now, if we're going to be casting shadows, we actually need to cast the shadows onto something. So obviously, a plane that represents the ground is a really good place to start. And what I do is I normally do a triangle to start with. So I might just go there, there, and there. The reason why I do a triangle is I can actually stretch it up and down, representing the corners of the site. So I might know that this front corner of the site is 300 higher. So I just stretch that point by Z 300, enter. And that'll bring him up 300. And let's say this corner is down 600. That gives us a basic angle of that plane. I can then go plane, add vertex, select the side, and just pop him out beyond the building. So now that won't have displayed in all, but if I go to ISO, show him here, you'll see that we've got a plane that runs down. I like to use a very basic plane. The less complicated the plane, the better, because it just keeps your shadows simple, because ultimately it's projecting onto that plane and creating planes for the shadows. If that wasn't adequate to describe it, the site in a very general way, I would add a couple extra triangles and sort of give a very basic DTM to the site. But for what we're doing at the moment, that's what I'm going to stick with. We're going to go to the top and show that plane again. And we might go, right, that might be our site, but we want to make sure that our shadows don't go off the edge of your plane. So you might actually go plus 10 meters. The shadows aren't going to go off this side, but let's just extend it out a bit. We know that we're well beyond. The shadows will end up being whatever color the plane that they're landing on is, for what it's worth. If we just go hide lines, there's our little building in the middle. And we're going to just go render, shadows. I'm going to stick it on layer 108. And I'll explain. I've got a little macro that just does a little convert on it, and it picks up everything that's drawn on 108. So, which I use for nothing else but shadows. So yeah, we just set. We're going to do say the September 22nd equinox at, let's go 9 a.m. In Melbourne. And if it's going to take north as 0, which is basically it's the y-axis straight up the page. Now let's say north is not straight up the page. What are we going to do? I'm going to just insert my north point. Annotation, north pointer. I like that one at the moment. And let's say I've lined him up with number of copies is 0. I'm just going to rotate that. And what I would normally do is just pop him in straight on the surveyor's plan right on his north. And then I just rotate using 3 points to align it with the surveyors. So there's north hanging off that direction. I go, okay, so what value am I going to put into the dialog box for north? Pretty simple. I go to the measure tools, and I can just measure bearing from here to there. And my bearing is 25.63. And so that's what I put in for my rotation from my north. So if we go back to our render shadows, this will have automatically reset. It doesn't remember what layer it's on. So we're just going to do that. 9 o'clock, it remembered. And it was, what did we say, 23.59? Whatever that figure was.
Yeah.
Okay, and just select the plane that I want to cast the shadows onto, and it casts the shadows. So if you have a look at that, all it's done is projected it straight onto that plane. The color of that, as I said, so our layer is 108, color is 250. That's because the plane that we're projecting onto is 250, and it comes up with this lovely grid. But that shadow is just a plane in itself. So you can actually change that however you like. So instead of hatch, let's change it to solid. And what I do is I actually have a color that I reserve for shadows, which is color 246. And the other thing that we won't want is we won't want the edges. If the surface that we're projecting onto was a series of triangles and there was a fold between the triangles, say here, you would get a line across your shadow, which just complicates things. So by using just a solid plane, no edges, you end up with a nice clean shadow. So let's say our ground.
We can't set the default to be a solid line. It always has to be the hatch.
It just, yeah, we've got no control over the hatch. That's what we've got. So that's shadows in the very simplest form. It's projected it onto that plane. So as I said, when it comes in, it looks like, no, that's solid, that it comes like that. I've actually got a little macro that I just go shadow change, and it just selects everything on layer 108 and changes it to the settings that I like.
So this all is all in the same model, correct? When
Yeah, this is all in the same model. If I had referenced that building in,
yep,
it would still cast the shadows.
okay.
If I was to actually cast shadows onto that building, so I'll do exactly that. Let's go File, Save As, and we'll call it Building 1. Building 1, render, shadows, 108, 25. Okay, now we're going to select this plane and the plane of the walls on the neighboring place that we actually want the shadows to cast onto. So I reckon that's probably, I don't know, we might need to pick up a couple here on the front as well. Let's do that and cast them. And you'll see that it certainly did go up on the neighbour's place. If we go shadows, change shadow, that then shows where the shadows are casting up onto that neighbour's property. Obviously, if they had a window here, the shadow just in there below their window from our proposal is not going to be an issue.
It's casting their shadow as well.
It is. The wall that I used for my is layer 901. Let's. I'll actually get. We'll just use our plane. Change that to layer 901, and then we just go to layer. Turn off everything. Turn off everything except for layer 901, and it's intriguing. That's
Left your 108 line there.
yeah. I think I had only the name layers, so I just need to hide unused layers, and you'll see I've got a bunch of layers still turned on. So I want to set our current layer to 901, and then I want to actually turn off everything else and go OK. And
You turned it off too.
I turned layer 901 off.
And you need your plane there as well.
Yeah, that's on layer 901. I changed it to that. So now we've just got a fence on a plane, and we can do independent shadows for the fence. So in this case, what I would do, back to our render tool, shadow, layer 108. We went 24.59 or whatever our angle was at 9 o'clock. Cast our shadow, and that put it onto layer 108, which is turned off at the moment. So I probably should have just done it to a different layer number. But there you go, you've got green shadows for the fence shadow. And what I end up doing is I end up selecting my 2 lots of shadows, and I go to a view that I have for shadows. I show those shadows in this view. I then change them to the layer number that I want. So these are 9 o'clock shadows. So I go 109 is the layer. Then our layer's turned off. So I'm just going to jump back to 109, turn that shadow on. And then I know that then I can actually go and select those 2 shadows again. What I'm going to do is flatten them by using scale 110. That makes them flat to the CPL, so they're no longer following the ground. They're both flat and they both coplanar. And what I can now do is change the properties of my shadow from the fence, so that, let's say we're going to use a mid-grey. We're going to hatch him without the crosshatch. And we're going to put him on a 170 angle, like so. And then that shows my fence hatching separate to my building shadows. What I would often do is actually go no hatching at all. And I would actually go style 12. And then just go, there's my fence shadow casting off and my shadow from the building.
Are those planes adjustable at all?
Yeah, they're just a plane.
So you can just trim them.
So yeah, you can say, oh, that shadow went too far. I want to trim it back. No, maybe we shouldn't do that. We're trying to represent the shadows correctly, aren't we?
But technically I could cut out my shadow that's on the existing shadow of the neighbour's property anyway.
Yeah, so if we go show, select all, we don't, so here in the shadow view, I don't actually want to see the DTM, I don't want to see the ground. I decide if I go to hide lines, I don't want to show this shadow on the far side of that building. I can just go trim edge, select that plane edge, back to 2 points somewhere under the building, and get rid of the shadow that way. So this is the real magic of what shadows actually being planes rather than just a automatically generated parametric, is that it gives you the freedom to just change it however you want that shadow to display. If you want to edit it, trim it, whatever, it's a plane. And that's where once you've done the shadow, actually flattening it makes those edits a whole lot easier, because then they're coplanar, they're flat, and you know where they are. Sometimes you'll find that when they're on an angle, particularly if you've got a steep site, they become very confusing about what they're showing, where they're actually at. So just projecting them up flat to a CPL at whatever height you want them makes life a whole lot easier for that. The other way of doing this shadow for the fence is just what I've done recently. Is I just made myself a fence post, cast shadows at 3 different times, and then made myself a symbol. This shadow from a fence. So I just put in a fence post and I cast the shadows for 3 different times with north straight up. I then put in these 3 lines off that 1950 fence post, and I've put a little north pointer on it. So now I can just move that to the north pointer. I can rotate by 3 points over here and move that, and I can just whack that on each of my fence posts. And then I can actually just trace off lines for my fence lines, shadows, rather than going to all that hassle of making a 3D fence. On my building, I always want the shadows to be from behind me and from, top left. The sun's behind me and up to the left. Whereas if I sort of just take a random approach to it, and then you reference them together, you end up with the sun coming from the left and from the right, and shadows crisscrossing in the middle. Let's just go to a view like this. I'm just going to hide this stuff just for the... No, it's in the building itself. So there's 2 ways you can actually decide whether you're going to put the shadows on the actual building itself or whether you do the shadows in the reference. If you don't want shadows adding to the model, you just reference it somewhere else, do your shadows. So I set up with a site development plan, and I reference everything into that site development plan. I can then do shadows from multiple buildings all together, where one building will shadow onto the next and all that sort of stuff, where I've referenced them all together. Or I can just work on the building as a standalone building. So I'm just going to reopen up building 1. I'm going to hide my elevation markers for the moment. But effectively what I do is just change where north is. For elevation 1, in our example, this is the south elevation. So if I just do my shadows on this wall, 10 o'clock in the morning, so hour 10, let's go north straight up the page for the moment. I go, okay, I'd select my wall, and of course my whole wall is shadowed. So if I actually change that to solid, it doesn't do much for the presentation. The settings, same settings, 10 o'clock in the morning on the equinox, 108, and I'm going to just rotate the north 180 degrees. And then I just get a nice little shadow up the top. That's how she comes out.
But the brick doesn't show behind the shadow?
Yeah, it does. Just my shadow and my brickwork are almost the same grey. If I decide, so by using the one colour that I always use for shadow, I can just jump to that and just say, actually, I'd like my shadows to just be a little bit lighter, and that'll adjust all the shadows right across the board. So if I go to elevation 2, the settings that we use, so rotation 90, shadow, again, 10 o'clock, and then I just rotate 90. If I'm just going in a hide lines view,